Today marks the 72nd observance of Yom Hashoah, or Holocaust Remembrance Day. The day commemorates the 6 million Jews who were murdered during the rise of Nazi Germany and World War II, and acknowledges the heroism of the survivors and those who rescued them. Observances include memorial services in Israel and here in the U.S., a 2-mile walk from Auschwitz to Birkenau in what has become known as the March of the Living, and in Israel, a 2-minute period of silence signaled by siren in which everyone stops what they're doing to mark the moment. For the first time this year, Holocaust Remembrance ceremonies were also held in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. It's the first time such events have been held in an Arab state following normalization agreements signed with Israel just last year. Ultimately, it's hoped that this day will inspire people to confront hatred, eliminate genocide, and remind ourselves that we will never forget. And on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, we're very pleased to be joined by Stephen Nachamie. Stephen is a film and stage director who joins us from his digs in the New York City area to talk about this special day. Stephen, how are you?
I'm not bad. Thank you very much, Elliott. I'm so glad to be here today.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for joining us to tell us about Holocaust Remembrance Day. Just exactly what is it? I think people have a general idea of what is to be expected on this day, but from your perspective, from what you've learned all these years, what is this and what is it for?
So Holocaust Remembrance Day I believe it began in 1949, but then officially by the Israeli government in 1951 as a day to commemorate the 6 million Jews lost in the Holocaust. It's a day sort of mourning, of remembrance in Israel. I believe a siren is sounded for 2 minutes there. And it's also memorialized in other countries. You know, in the U.S., it's a day of reflection. It's a day of remembering survivors that are still with us, are telling their stories. And it's a day, especially now, to bring home never again, that we remember what happened, that it shouldn't happen again. And also sort of a day to reflect upon the hate and violence still happening and how to be an upstander, not a bystander within this.
Sure.
But it's to memorialize the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis.
Many of the people who were involved in the Holocaust who survived are not with us anymore. I mean, there are fewer and fewer, I suppose, every year, considering the age of that. You have any idea of the numbers, or in fact, where can they be found? Are most here in the U.S., or they're just scattered about?
Scattered all over the world, basically. A lot are in Israel. A lot are around the world. I know in the New York area, there's still thousands around. But we are the last generation or generations to hear these stories firsthand and meet these survivors. So we're very fortunate, and we sort of have the responsibility to become witnesses to their stories and move these stories ahead.
You became at least involved with this most recently through a film that you just completed. Tell me about that and what you did on it and where it is now. Is it ready to go?
Right. So I'm the storytelling director for the Witness Project, which the UJA Federation New York, and specifically I worked with the UJA Federation Long Island, created the Witness Project. A woman named Jane Pashman is the full program leader, but it is to bring Holocaust survivors in the area and high school students together so that they get to know each other sort of as a community on a social level. And then the students hear the stories, and in one program they create visual art about it, and in the program that I'm running, we create a theatrical way to tell the stories. So about 3 years ago, I came in as a co-director to create a stage production for this benefit. and we told 11 survivor stories with 35 students, and all of those survivors present on stage. And we brought a multimedia backdrop to it, a lot of photos, some film with it. So that was in 2019, we had that. And I was brought back last year. And last year, I even moved the program a little bit more forward, making sure the students got to know the survivors in a social way first. We would have sort of a meal together and talk about what they had in common. For instance, what they like to bake, what music.
Hmm.
They found out that one gentleman loved The Bachelor, so a group
Wow.
of a group of young ladies, they bonded over that. But it was important to me that they get to know equally, so that when they heard these stories, they knew the person that they were hearing the story about.
Hmm.
So my theatrical input was more sort of last year with COVID. It became first on Zoom, then a film project. And Yishai Gross, who I work with, he's producing this film, and he's a director on the film. He executive produced the film Paperclips, if you've seen it. It's a documentary about a school that was trying to teach the impact of the Holocaust and the loss. And they had the students, I believe it was collect 6 million paper clips. And they started with just that amount to give
Wow.
an idea to the students.
Hmm.
So last year we did sort of a documentary with the students at home, and then this year we geared it with Eric Smith, who's dealing with two survivors. I deal with two survivors, and I deal with three survivors. One second generation story this year, where the son is telling the father's story. But this year it's a film, and Yishai's again producing, and we brought together. We planned it as a film this year with COVID.
Hmm.
So we were able to film the survivor stories early on. We had that documentation. And as a group with Matt Scott, we wrote a story so that the students could tell it in a dramatic way together. And sort of as the year went on, just with safety issues, we pivoted again. And it's really very impactful because now we have the footage of the survivor telling their story, which will be intercut with one of the students portraying the young survivor. So
Mm.
with costumes, with backgrounds, and all kinds of visuals to put you in that place.
Sure.
And then each survivors group has 5 students. The second generation has 6. So we have one student portraying the survivor, 5 students telling the story. So you see not only the facts of the story, but how it impacted them,
Hmm.
and how they related to the survivor they met. So they know the person and the personality and there. So this year we finished filming the students about I think it was 2 weeks ago, and it's going into editing, and we're getting all the information and photos from the survivors for a premiere on, let me double check my date. I think it is
Please
June
do.
9th.
Hmm.
I think it is June 9th. I'll have to double check that one for you, Elliot.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll certainly let people know if there's a change in that. Let's talk about the students that you work with. I would imagine this is not common knowledge to them, or was it? Did you have a sort of leap of faith that you had to take some of the students and bringing them up to speed on some of this history and some of the importance of what these people went through and its meaning not only to history but to them as well? How much of a leap did you have to make in that way?
Well, in a way, we provide a context. We began this year with a virtual visit to the Holocaust Museum in Glen Cove, Long Island. So, sort of
Hmm.
a basis of how hate spreads, how Hitler's plan went into action, and his final solution in the camps. We gave some terminology there. But what's very interesting with this group of students for the last 3 years, it's a diverse group with different frameworks of background, depending on if they had relatives, if it was a part of their life growing up. And these are not just Jewish students. It's a mix of students sort of all backgrounds.
Hmm.
And what's interesting is the passion to get to know these survivors and to carry on the stories, and also to find ways to be upstanders, to combat hate as they go on in the world, is such a passion of the students. So what I find is that depending on what they're taught in school or from their family, they have a certain base, and then we go on and fill that out in terms of um, last year and a bit this year, what we did is we went through the rights that we take for granted without telling them. We went through a list of rights like being able to vote or love who you love or go to
Hmm.
school where you live, all of that. And I had them number them 1 to 10 based on their importance. And we went around and said, yeah, that's really important. That's great. And a lot of them, interestingly, are, they're high school students. So voting wasn't at
Sure.
the top of the list for some. But then I took all of these sheets of their lists and I tore them up and I said, let's talk about the Nuremberg laws. Here's what the Nazis did by taking away everything.
Hmm.
And um, so we give them a background on Holocaust education and sort of a timeline. Sometimes we discuss current events where we see hatred spreading or what you can do to stand up against that. And so it's sort of a background in many ways.
Hmm. But
As,
for,
as
for I'm sorry, but for the most part, you felt going forward that they were comfortable enough with the information, and which I suppose is just a good exercise in and of itself, because as much information as we have out there today, we've got a library in our pockets that also doubles as a phone, for gosh sakes. But we find
yes,
that a lot of people, a lot of kids in subsequent generations aren't familiar with some of the basics things that your generation, my generation, sort of took for granted. So I suppose that this was just a useful exercise in history for many of them as well.
yes, because different school systems teach different things. Some school systems take time to teach about the Holocaust. Some, it's just a part of the curriculum.
Hmm.
Um, but in a way, even from what I knew, from the basis of what I knew, for me, it's a continuing education. There's no way to really learn everything about this. You can give them a framework of what happened around the time and how the events sort of snowballed and the danger of it all. But in terms of how they experience survivors, they're the survivors that survived the camps, lost family in the camps. There are other survivors who were hidden children. There are survivors who were young enough to be put on the kinder transport and sent away, to neutral countries. It's really it's a spectrum that might not hit you the second you think of Holocaust survivors or Hitler or the Nazis or anti-Semitism. It's
Hmm.
really it's a wide scope that sort of the research keeps going
Hmm.
based on these stories as well.
Hmm. You became familiar with one particular survivor, woman by the name of Kathy, who you developed a relationship with, and it's quite poignant how this all unraveled. Tell me about Kathy. Who was she, and what did she mean to you?
Well, Kathy Greets was a survivor. I've worked with several survivors, and I'll refer to them a bit later. But she was a survivor that was new to us this year. And interestingly enough, a lot of my life and her life sort of tied together. She was born in 1930 in Budapest, Hungary. And she was a very fascinating woman because I had read her story and I never got to meet her in person, actually, due to COVID.
Hmm.
But I had called her and I said, I've read your story and I'm, so much to ask you. I'm excited to be working with you. And she said, yes. And now I need to know your story. I need to know about you. She would always say on the screen, I know about you in the second dimension, and now I need to know the third dimension. So we got to know each other that way, where not only was I hearing about her story, but we ended up discussing art and movies and music and current events. And she had a love of fully rounded sort of life and program. She didn't
Hmm.
want to just be there as a textbook.
Right.
She wanted people to get to meet her, and she even the students she was great with because she'd always say, now tell me about you,
Hmm.
or I need to know more about you.
Wow.
And so they really enjoyed meeting her.
Yeah.
But we would check in usually once or twice a week. And yeah, she was just a very, very special lady. Her husband had passed away. She didn't have immediate family, but she had a lot of friends.
Hmm.
She was very much loved. She passed away from COVID on February 26th, sort of in the middle of this journey.
Mm.
And it was a hard loss because she was so full of life. She used to say she was 90, but she was teenage 90.
Yeah.
And she never grew up, so she won't grow old. And she passed these messages to the kids. You
Yeah.
know,
Well,
very special.
let's introduce Kathy to the viewer, to you, and let's take a look at this. This is a short clip of an interview, I guess, or a conversation that you had with her. I believe it was over Zoom, not too long ago. This is only part of a larger conversation, but I think it, in many ways, kind of depicts and outlines I saw it and I immediately knew who she was. You know, it didn't take too long at all. And I can see why you became enamored with her and certainly developed a relationship with her. So let's take a look at
Well,
this right now.
can I preface it if
Please
that's
do.
okay?
Please.
So this is from actually we didn't know this would be sort of our last Zoom. This is from February 11th, and on the next day she started to come down with COVID symptoms. But I just wanted to also preface this with Andrea Bolender, who is a good friend of hers and works with the Holocaust Museum in Glen Cove, and some of her friends. I shared this with them because I thought, well, this is a conversation that she let me record, and they said, please share this on the internet, put it on Facebook, share this because this entire conversation encapsulates her spirit and who she was.
It absolutely does. Here, meet Kathy.
One thing, how do you shave with soap or with an electric shaver?
No, I use with the shaving cream, and yeah.
Yeah, my husband used to do it.
Yeah.
He hated to shave. You know, he always said to me, look, I didn't shave yesterday and today. Can I still go out on the street? And he was hoping that I would say yes. He just hated to shave. Do you hate to shave?
I always sort of, if I can just shower and go, because shaving I think takes a little time to prepare, and sometimes I just forget, especially with Zoom, because I tend to remember to shave when I'm getting dressed up to go to work, or to go to teach. And now it's sort of,
I don't mind it. I think it's very sexy.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kathy. Thank you.
Oh, Stephen.
Well, I can't wait to meet in person. Yes,
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
I look forward to it as well.
And you're going to see a teenage 90.
Yes.
Who is a teenager. That's how I feel. I mean, it's ridiculous, but I feel so young.
You are.
I feel so much energy to do things, and all my days are filled with activities. I don't really slack off. I do my errands, I do everything here in the house, and I enjoy myself. I really enjoy life. I'm very glad to be alive.
And I'm very glad to know you. You were just so inspiring and so filled with joy, and we need more.
Because people think old age is horrible. It's not true. You get a lot of things in your old age that you didn't have when you were young. You got all the experience. You do things better when you're old because you learned your lesson. And people forget how difficult young years are. First of all, you are caught up with trying to find a partner.
Right.
Always a very big deal. Either a male partner or a female partner or a straight partner or a gay partner, but it's difficult to find. So then you find somebody, and living with somebody together is not easy either. Then you got rotten bosses and rotten colleagues very often.
Right.
Being young is not the best thing, and people make it out, oh, it was wonderful to be young. It's not true. We had a lot of problems that we don't have them.
Yeah. Well, you realize what's important and what brings you joy. So that's a gift. Big
So
gift.
I think old age is wonderful because you learn so much and you don't make the same mistake that you did when you were young.
You are wonderful.
Great to see you, and I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, wonderful.
Listen, have a wonderful evening, have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
Don't forget to shave. But
I won't.
I think I like it.
Thank you.
It is nice. It is,
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you.
it's very, interesting looking.
Well, I will talk to you soon. I'll talk to you this week.
Oh, I hope so. Good night, Steve.
Good night, Kathy.
God bless you.
You too.
Enough now. Bye.
Bye.
I see you took her advice about shaving.
Yes, I did. I did. I did.
That is so sweet. I'm struck by two things watching that. A, very wise, and why shouldn't she be at her age? But more insightful in that she we're reminded of how as we grow older, certainly our shell tends to address the passage of time, but our mind kind of stays the same. And I've always told people that. I when she said that, I said, I know what you're talking about, because up here is an 18-year-old who still wants to jump and rebound and play basketball all afternoon in 90-degree hot sun. This ain't gonna do it. But it's always good to recognize that if you keep this up here, the rest of it all stays young as well, and you can just see it in her visage and in her attitude. And it's just hard to believe that 2 days later, 3 days later, she was gone.
Yeah, I think it was about a week later. But you know what's interesting, working with the survivors, because even before I worked with survivors, there's an idea because of history books
One
or
thing.
because of
Go ahead.
an idea because of history books. I think we have an idea that a survivor is sort of this historical figure or someone who's going to be extremely fragile. That there's sort of what I've learned most, that I think the students have learned, is we're meeting people. We're meeting people who were targeted, and it didn't matter if they were religious. It didn't matter how well off, how well connected their families were. It didn't matter. They were just targeted. And it's something we're seeing still today. And sort of the spectrum of survivors, there's a survivor that I've worked with. His name is Renee Slotkin. He and his sister were twins that were experimented on by Dr. Mengele, and he lost a lot of his family. He was in the camps. There's several survivors that were in the camps. Ruth Mermelstein, who went through 3 camps and survived with her sister. And another survivor, his name is Werner Reich, and he's extraordinary because he went through several camps, lost a lot of family. And this is sort of where I'm getting to with Kathy's spirit, is that Werner, I asked him, I said, what got you through? Was it faith? Was it praying? And he said, yes, but it was also humor. Humor got us through because we couldn't be where we were. That if we prayed too much, or if we prayed to get out, it would drain us, that we wouldn't have, our life force would be gone if that's all we concentrated on. So in his case, he said that they told jokes, they told limericks, they told dirty jokes, but he spoke several languages. So in terms of being in Auschwitz, he translated it to almost everybody, so everybody could get that moment, of light. To survive. One thing that a lot of survivors said, and this I believe is Werner, is that you can either choose to look at the mud or look at the sky. So what I found with the survivors is, because there's a huge trauma. They've lost a lot of family, and Kathy I'll talk about because her story is a little bit different. But in terms of survivors in the camps, in terms of survivors who were sent away on the kinder transport, that they've lost so much that throughout what they've been through, they've seen the worst. So a lot of the life lessons are keep looking ahead, don't sweat the small stuff. The small stuff is small stuff. Stand up for what you believe in, but also you're here, you're living, find a way to enjoy it, find family, find connection, do what you love. And that's been very impactful. One reason why Kathy's story was great for the students to hear is because Hungary was one of the last countries invaded in 1944, right? So there was sort of, while there was anti-Semitism in Budapest and all of this, there also sort of was, it was a very sophisticated, a very educated city, a very cultured city. So there was a belief of this can't happen here. So even though there was anti-Semitism and there was racism, there was a belief that this can't happen here. So her family basically had everything taken from them. Their Jews were all put in the ghetto. The leader of Hungary at the time, Miklos Horthy, was anti-Semitic, but he wasn't going to be a murderer. So at a certain point when the Nazis started to lose, he was going to ally with, he's going to ally with the Allies. And Hitler brought in Eichmann, and he brought in a party called the Arrow Cross took over, because if they were losing, they were going to murder everybody. That was his goal.
Yeah.
So in a way, her family was not religious. She didn't know she was Jewish until her grandfather was in terror, and he had the whole family converted to Christianity. And then from there, they learned that the Nazis did not care, that if you had Jewish blood and Jewish genes, you were going to be killed. So in her journey, it's something that I think students today need to hear as well. I mean, all the horrors that happened in the camps are, it's horrific, the murder and all of this. But the point to remember that's a little bit different with her is that she didn't think anything could happen. The family didn't, they were doing just fine. But no matter what you looked like, where you hung out, whatever, she was tagged as being Jewish, and that was it. That was it.
Yeah. In the survivors that you met and talked to, people along with Kathy, and it's funny that you should mention the fact that the folks there in Hungary, including Kathy and her family at the time, didn't really think it could happen there. I'm reminded of the 4 years that we just went through, that we fortunately, many of us who wanted change, were able to effect change and move things back into a new normality, so to speak. Because I was very fond of, and I consider myself to be a fairly knowledgeable student of history. And when I argued this point with many people, I would be quick to tell them, if you want to see where all this is heading, if you want to see where this country could go very easily, if we don't make a change real soon in this election, just look back to 1938 Germany, and you'll see some of the same touchstones, some of the same clues as to where we're going, and you'll even find people there who would tell you at the time, no, this couldn't happen here. No way this could happen, and yet it did. I was firmly convinced that that's where we were heading if we had 4 more years of the Trump administration. Did you happen to hear any of that sentiment from some of the people that you talked to?
So what's interesting is to an extent, we did not fully get into the specifics of the politics, but what I did hear from a lot of survivors along the way was this is too familiar. This is very familiar, and we need to be vigilant. I heard from a lot of survivors. It also was a way to, as we dealt with the 6th, as we dealt with January 6th, it got us back to the base with the students of, we've talked about propaganda. We've talked about how things spread. We've talked about if one person's angry and another person gets angry, and then all of a sudden you have a mob. So a lot of it was very, very familiar, and just the signs of fascism, the scapegoating, the idea of supremacy. I mean, one thing that boggles my mind, especially with what we just dealt with and with Hitler, is there's such a frenzy, there's such an anger, there's such a need to scapegoat, and Hitler kept talking about the Aryan was, the blonde, the blue-eyed, and nobody's looking at Hitler going, wait a minute. I mean, so it's sort of the same thing, right, that we just dealt with. And, the other thing that boggles my mind, I mean, I guess depending on what political side you're on, there were some people that sort of gave it a pass, but yet there were people on January 6th wearing 6 million were not enough t-shirts, wearing Camp Auschwitz t-shirts. And that was horrifying because, I mean, they came with so many forms of hate and this idea of supremacy, and that was just horrifying.
Right, and the touchstones are all the same. You have a group of people who feel as if they've been marginalized, and that may be very true. It's one of the things that we're still dealing with. But in the meantime, you have this person or a group of people who come together and say, we've been wanting to do something for a long time. Let's use that line of thought, that feeling of being disassociated from the rest of society and not getting what I'm getting, and I see changes coming on, and why am I not getting what I'm getting, and how am I going to be displaced by all these? Let's use that to our advantage and point the finger at those people, and those people, and they're the reason that this is all happening, and blame it on somebody. And I truly believe all of that was happening through the Trump administration. They were,
Well,
we still have people pointing those fingers. They're certainly not in the same position that the former president was in at the time, but they're left behind,
well,
and they're following the same playbook.
and in terms of history, it's there's sort of a part of U.S. history that's not talked about a lot, because there was the American Nazi Party rally at I believe it was 1939 at Madison Square Garden. There's a film about it called A Night at the Garden. The government here was sending away boats of Jewish refugees away up until the U.S. got involved in the war. I mean, so it's certain things that are reminders of this almost happened here, this and the idea of this can't happen here. The biggest lessons, sort of staying nonpartisan with it, was be vigilant and look at the information that's coming there. You have to be vigilant. You have to fact check.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go with emotion. If you run with emotion, you might be digging yourself into a hole in terms of this not happen.
Absolutely. Well, one last thing: how can the average person or viewer and others find some survivors and participate in this, not only on this day but year round, if you want to help and care to add to your information?
Mm-hmm. So year round, I will send you a link about the film that we will be premiering. But also, if you reach out to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., there's several survivors that I've worked with in New York who are very involved. They do programs with students there. You can reach out there. There's a couple who are survivors that I stayed with when I directed a show at American Century Theater in Virginia. Anya and Marcel Dreimer. They do a lot with the museum. The Holocaust Museum in New York. If you reach out to the UJA Federation, the Shoah Foundation, Steven Spielberg's foundation,
Mm-hmm.
the stories are out there, the people are out there. And I think the biggest thing is to listen to the facts of the stories, but you also have to remember these were people that the generation, especially now, that are alive to talk to us, they were robbed of their childhoods.
Sure.
There's one survivor I worked with this year. His name is Alex Constantine, and he was about 2 years old. He was when in Poland, they invaded, and the Nazis were trying to bomb Russia, but all the Polish became refugees out of the villages, or most of the number of the Polish.
Mm-hmm.
But now he was a Jewish refugee. So basically, he spent 3 years on the run. His mother saved his life. So in terms of childhood, a lot of the people that we're meeting now were robbed of that. And I think the biggest thing is knowing the facts. But these stories, we have the opportunity now to meet survivors so that these penetrate on a human level,
Mm-hmm.
because they are very intense stories. And I believe that it's also, they make the impact if you know about the person and meet the person, because the biggest sort of light bulbs for these students are when they have the meetings with the survivors, they get to know them. And then there's the flip of saying the words, of actually telling the stories and watching sort of the connections of, oh, this happened when they were 15. I'm 15. I don't know what I would do. Or, wow, that happened when they were 3. It's always sort of a connection that we have of saying, what were you doing at that age?
Sure.
Or what were you responsible for? So I think it is why we have these people to talk to. I mean, they're extraordinary, but it's also, there's so much to be learned just as human beings. And I think that's one thing that even I talked about before I started working with survivors, that they were these sort of iconic figures that were, almost like these historic figures, these superheroes that were not of the same realm, but we all have, it's all humans. These were humans that were targeted.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing we saw, that we're still seeing with George Floyd, with targeting, with that there's a scapegoat, that there's a certain population turning on another population.
Sure.
And so a big thing that has been important to me this year is, as well, you have the Holocaust survivors and the 6 million Jews on Holocaust Remembrance Day, but within the education, I also we usually bring out, and I usually bring out the code of what the markings were in the camps, because if you were queer, if you were gay, if you were a political prisoner, the Roma people, were, so the biggest impact was that he set for the final solution of killing all the Jews. I mean, that was really what his goal was. But in terms of the students learning, it's that if you were marked, you were marked. And it didn't matter how well-to-do you were, how safe you grew up, or how connected you were. Your neighbors could turn on you because they were in danger for helping you. I mean, their lives were in danger.
Sure. Well, it's so fascinating, and it's very true that if we choose to forget about what happened in the past, we're bound to repeat it. So it is so important that we continue to remember. Stephen Nachamie, thank you. Fascinating conversation, and very fascinating, and I'm glad that you're involved in this, because your passion is obvious, and I'm sure it's going to show through the film, which we will all take a look at. But thank you very much for your involvement with this, and thank you for your conversation here and now.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. If you'd like to see The Witness Project, the film that Stephen was talking about, it does premiere June the 9th, and we'll leave a link in the comments below so you can plan to see it with your family and friends. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, and then be back here next week for another edition of Now. Till then, take care. Peace.